The legacy of the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne holds more than just power. It holds secrets. What if I told you that the most feared seat in Westeros wasn't just built from 1,000 swords, but from 1,000 broken dreams? Today, we're diving deep into the dark origins of the Iron Throne. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at that twisted metal seat the same way again. But first, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we're about to uncover truths that even the Maesters tried to hide. And stick around until the very end, because the final revelation about the Iron Throne's true purpose will blow your mind. The Forge of Power. Picture this. Aegon the Conqueror stands victorious on the field of fire, watching as his enemies' swords melt under the breath of Balerion, the Black Dread. But here's what most people don't realize. The Iron Throne wasn't just a symbol of conquest. It was a psychological weapon designed to break the spirits of those who dared to challenge Targaryen rule. The Maesters tell us that Aegon ordered the throne to be forged from the swords of his fallen enemies, but they never mention why he chose such an uncomfortable design. Think about it. Why would the most powerful man in Westeros create a seat that cuts and wounds its occupant? The answer lies in the deeper psychology of power itself. Aegon understood something that modern rulers have forgotten. True power isn't about comfort. It's about constant vigilance. Every cut from those twisted blades served as a reminder that ruling comes with a price. And if you think that's just poetic metaphor, wait until you hear about the curse that some say was forged into the very metal itself. But before we dive into that supernatural element, let's talk about the immediate impact of the throne's creation. The moment Aegon sat upon those melted swords, he wasn't just claiming dominion over the Seven Kingdoms. He was fundamentally changing the nature of power in Westeros forever. Prior to Aegon's conquest, the Seven Kingdoms were exactly that, 7 separate realms, each with their own traditions, their own forms of governance, and their own understanding of what it meant to rule. The Starks ruled from Winterfell with honor and duty. The Lannisters commanded respect through wealth and cunning from Casterly Rock. The Tyrells cultivated power through political maneuvering from Highgarden, but the Iron Throne changed everything. It centralized power in a way that Westeros had never seen before. Suddenly, there was one ultimate authority, one final arbiter of justice, one seat that ruled them all. And that transformation had consequences that would echo through the centuries. The first of these consequences became apparent almost immediately. The Iron Throne created what we might call the succession crisis paradigm. Before Aegon, when a king died, his realm's succession was usually clear-cut, following established traditions. But the Iron Throne represented dominion over multiple kingdoms, each with their own succession laws and customs. This created an inherent instability that would plague the Targaryen dynasty for generations. Every time a king died, the question wasn't just who would inherit, it was who had the right to inherit dominion over 7 different kingdoms, each with potentially different ideas about legitimacy. And here's where things get really interesting. Because the Iron Throne's influence on succession wasn't just political, it was mystical. You see, there are whispers in the oldest texts, stories that the Maesters dismiss as superstition, that suggest the throne itself chooses its occupant. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds like fantasy nonsense. But consider this. How many times have we seen the rightful heir defeated by someone with a weaker claim? How many times has the person who should have inherited the throne been passed over for someone who seemed to have the throne's favor? Robert Baratheon defeated Rhaegar Targaryen despite having a weaker claim. Joffrey sat the throne despite questions about his parentage. Even Cersei managed to claim power when by all rights she should have been cast aside. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the Iron Throne has its own agenda. But let's get back to the tangible impacts of the throne's creation. The forging of the Iron Throne marked the beginning of what historians call the Age of Dragon Lords, and this period fundamentally reshaped not just the political landscape of Westeros, but its very culture. Before the conquest, the concept of a knight was largely foreign to most of the Seven Kingdoms. The Reach had their chivalric traditions, yes, but the North had their own warrior culture. Dorne had their desert fighters, and the Iron Islands had their reavers. The Iron Throne changed all of that. Aegon's court became the cultural center of Westeros, and the values emanating from King's Landing began to spread throughout the realm. The knightly ideals of honor, chivalry, and service to the crown became the standard by which all warriors were measured. This wasn't just cultural imperialism. It was a deliberate strategy to create loyalty to the Iron Throne itself. And it worked. Within a generation, knights from every corner of Westeros were swearing oaths of fealty to the Iron Throne. The throne became more than a seat of power. It became the symbol of a unified realm, the focal point of a new shared identity. But here's the dark truth that the histories don't tell you. This unification came at a terrible cost. The Iron Throne didn't just unite the Seven Kingdoms, it devoured them. The rich cultural traditions that had developed over thousands of years were slowly eroded, replaced by a homogenized court culture that served the throne's interests. The old gods gave way to the Seven. Ancient bloodlines were absorbed into the Targaryen power structure. Local customs were abandoned in favor of King's Landing fashions. The Iron Throne wasn't just ruling the Seven Kingdoms, it was consuming them, one tradition at a time. And if you think that's a bold claim, just wait until you hear about the prophetic visions that Aegon supposedly received during the forging process. According to some accounts, while the swords were being melted and shaped, Aegon experienced visions of the future, visions that would guide Targaryen policy for the next 3 centuries. These visions allegedly showed him the coming of the Long Night, the threat from beyond the wall, and the role that the Iron Throne would play in the ultimate battle between ice and fire. If these accounts are true, then the Iron Throne wasn't just a seat of temporal power. It was a weapon forged specifically to prepare Westeros for an existential threat. That would explain so much about Targaryen behavior over the centuries. Their obsession with dragons, their willingness to intermarry, to keep bloodlines pure, their mysterious connection to fire and prophecy, all of it could be explained if the Iron Throne was designed not just to rule, but to preserve humanity itself. But that's just the beginning of the story, because the true legacy of the Iron Throne isn't just in its creation, it's in how it shaped every single ruler who sat upon it, and how it continues to influence the realm even today. Are you starting to see the pattern? The Iron Throne isn't just a chair, it's a force of nature, a catalyst that transforms everything it touches, and we're just getting started. Make sure you're subscribed, because in the next part, we're going to explore how the Iron Throne's influence corrupted the very bloodline that created it, leading to the dance of dragons that nearly destroyed the realm. And trust me, the revelations about what really happened during the Civil War will change everything you thought you knew about Targaryen history. But before we continue, I want you to think about this. If the Iron Throne was forged with the specific purpose of preparing Westeros for the Long Night, then every civil war, every succession crisis, every moment of chaos in the realm's history wasn't just political upheaval. It was the throne testing its chosen champions, weeding out the weak, and preparing for the ultimate battle. In our next segment, we'll explore how this philosophy shaped the Targaryen civil war, known as the Dance of Dragons, and why the throne's influence may have been the real reason the dragons died out. The answer will shock you: the legacy of the Iron Throne. Welcome back to Whispers of Westeros, where we uncover the secrets that shaped the Seven Kingdoms. In our last segment, we revealed how the Iron Throne wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a mystical weapon forged to prepare Westeros for the Long Night. But that's just the beginning. Today, we're diving into the darkest chapter of Targaryen history, the Dance of Dragons. And here's the shocking truth that will change everything you thought you knew. The civil war that nearly destroyed the realm wasn't just about succession. It was the Iron Throne's brutal test to determine which Targaryen bloodline was worthy of facing the ultimate darkness. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what we're about to reveal will blow your mind. And stick around until the end, because the final revelation about why the dragons really died will leave you speechless. The throne's first test. The year is 129 AC, and King Viserys I lies dying in the Red Keep. But here's what the histories don't tell you. On his deathbed, witnesses reported that the Iron Throne itself began to change. The metal grew warm, the sword seemed to shift and writhe, and several people swore they heard whispers emanating from the twisted steel. Coincidence? I don't think so, because what happened next suggests that the Iron Throne had been waiting for this moment, waiting to test the Targaryen bloodline in the most brutal way possible. You see, the succession crisis that erupted between Rhaenyra and Aegon II wasn't just a political dispute. It was a carefully orchestrated trial by fire, designed to determine which branch of the Targaryen family tree had the strength, cunning, and ruthlessness necessary to face the coming darkness. Think about it logically. The Iron Throne had spent over a century shaping Targaryen policy, influencing their decisions, guiding their bloodline toward a specific purpose. But by the time of Viserys' death, that bloodline had become soft, comfortable. The dragons were still mighty, yes, but their riders had lost the edge that Aegon the Conqueror possessed. The throne needed to fix that problem, and the Dance of Dragons was its solution. Now, you might be wondering, how could a chair orchestrate a civil war? The answer lies in the throne's subtle but persistent influence on the human psyche. Every king who sat upon those twisted swords reported the same thing. Whispers, visions, dreams that felt more real than reality itself. Viserys himself confessed to his closest advisors that the throne spoke to him in his dreams, showing him visions of ice and fire, of a great war that would determine the fate of humanity. But here's the crucial detail that most people miss. These visions didn't show him a united realm facing the threat. They showed him a realm forged in conflict, tempered by civil war, strengthened by loss. The Iron Throne wasn't trying to prevent the Dance of Dragons, it was orchestrating it. Consider the evidence. Viserys' decision to name Rhaenyra as his heir was unprecedented in Westerosi history. No woman had ever sat the Iron Throne, and the king knew full well that this decision would be contested. Yet he made it anyway, despite having legitimate male heirs available. Why? Because the throne showed him that only through conflict could the Targaryen bloodline be purified, refined, and prepared for its ultimate purpose. The Dance of Dragons wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate culling designed to eliminate the weak and elevate the strong, and the results speak for themselves. Look at the Targaryens who survived the dance compared to those who died. Rhaenyra, despite being the official heir, was consumed by her own ambition and rage. Aegon II, though he claimed the throne, was ultimately destroyed by his own cruelty and paranoia. But their children, Aegon III, Viserys II, and later Daeron I, these survivors emerged from the conflict harder, more focused, more aligned with the throne's true purpose. But here's where the story gets really dark. Because the Iron Throne's influence during the Dance of Dragons wasn't limited to the human participants, it extended to the dragons themselves. You've probably heard the official explanation for why the dragons died out. That the civil war killed too many of them, that their bloodlines became too inbred, that the knowledge of dragon rearing was lost. But that's not the whole truth. The dragons died because the Iron Throne willed it. I know that sounds impossible, but bear with me. The dragons were incredibly powerful, yes. but they were also incredibly difficult to control. Even the most skilled dragon riders struggled to maintain dominance over their mounts, and as the dragons grew larger and more numerous, they became less a tool of Targaryen power and more a threat to the realm's stability. The Iron Throne recognized this problem. Dragons were useful for conquest, for establishing dominance, for winning wars. But they were terrible for governance. Their very existence made the realm unstable, constantly on the edge of destruction whenever their riders disagreed. So the throne engineered their extinction. Think about how the dragons died during the dance. It wasn't just random violence, it was systematic elimination. Dragon fought dragon, rider killed rider, until the magnificent beasts that had conquered Westeros were reduced to a handful of sickly, stunted creatures that could barely fly. And here's the most chilling part. The survivors of the dance reported that in the final battles, the dragons seemed to turn on each other with an almost unnatural fury. Witnesses described the great beasts as if they were possessed, driven by some external force to destroy their own kind. That external force was the Iron Throne's influence, reaching out through the mystical connection between the Targaryens and their dragons, manipulating the bonds of loyalty and love that had kept the species alive for centuries. But why would the throne want to eliminate the dragons? The answer lies in the visions that Aegon the Conqueror received during the throne's forging. He saw the long night, yes, but he also saw how that battle would be won, not through dragonfire, but through unity, sacrifice, and the strength of the human spirit. The dragons made the Targaryens too powerful, too removed from the common people they would need to lead in the ultimate battle. The throne needed rulers who understood struggle, who had been tested by loss, who could inspire loyalty not through fear, but through shared hardship. The Dance of Dragons provided that test, and the extinction of the dragons forced the surviving Targaryens to find new sources of power, new ways to connect with their subjects, new strategies for maintaining control that didn't rely on the threat of immolation. But the throne's manipulation didn't end with the dragon's death. If anything, it intensified. The post-dance Targaryens were more susceptible to the throne's influence than ever before. Stripped of their dragon fire, they became increasingly dependent on the mystical connection to their seat of power. This is when we start to see the emergence of the Mad King syndrome that would plague the dynasty for generations. Aerys II, the last Targaryen king, wasn't just driven insane by paranoia and isolation. He was driven mad by the Iron Throne's whispers, by visions of fire and blood that consumed his rational mind. But here's the twist that will change everything you thought you knew about the Mad King. His madness wasn't random. It was purposeful. The throne was preparing him for a specific role in the coming conflict. A role that required him to be willing to burn everything down, if necessary. When Aerys planned to destroy King's Landing with wildfire, he wasn't just acting out of spite or madness. He was following a vision, a prophecy, a plan that the Iron Throne had been developing for centuries. The wildfire wasn't meant to kill his enemies. It was meant to be a weapon of last resort against the long night. Think about it. What's the one thing that could stop an army of ice zombies? Fire. Lots and lots of fire. Aerys's wildfire caches weren't the ravings of a madman. They were strategic preparations for a war that most people couldn't even imagine. But Jaime Lannister's intervention changed everything. By killing Aerys and preventing the wildfire plot, he didn't just save King's Landing, he disrupted a centuries-long plan that the Iron Throne had been orchestrating since its creation. And that's when things started to go wrong. Without the Mad King's wildfire, without the dragon eggs that had been secretly prepared, without the mystical connection between the Targaryens and their throne, the realm was left vulnerable to the coming darkness. Robert's rebellion wasn't just a political upheaval, it was a catastrophic disruption of the Iron Throne's master plan. And the throne's response was swift and brutal. Robert Baratheon, despite being a capable warrior and a charismatic leader, was never truly accepted by the Iron Throne. The seat cut him constantly, rejected his rule, and influenced events to undermine his reign at every turn. His marriage to Cersei, his conflicts with his brothers, his death in a hunting accident, all of it can be traced back to the throne's subtle but persistent opposition. The throne needed a Targaryen back on the seat, someone who could access the mystical connection necessary to fulfill the ancient prophecy, and it would manipulate events to make that happen, no matter how much chaos it caused. But here's the question that should be keeping you awake at night. If the Iron Throne has been manipulating events for centuries, if it orchestrated the dance of dragons, if it drove the Mad King insane, if it rejected Robert's rule, what is it planning next? Because the long night is coming, and the throne is still waiting for its chosen champion. The question is, who will that champion be, and what will they have to sacrifice to claim the throne's power? In our next segment, we're going to explore how the Iron Throne's influence shaped the events leading up to Robert's rebellion, and why the throne's rejection of non-Targaryen rule led to the catastrophic War of the Five Kings. But here's the teaser that will blow your mind. The throne didn't just reject Robert, it actively worked to restore Targaryen rule, manipulating events across 2 continents to bring about the return of dragons to Westeros. And the evidence for this conspiracy reaches all the way to Daenerys Targaryen in Essos. The throne's influence isn't limited by geography. It's been pulling strings across the narrow sea, engineering the birth of dragons, and preparing for the ultimate confrontation that will determine the fate of humanity. Don't miss part 3, because the revelations about the throne's global conspiracy will change everything you thought you knew about the Game of Thrones, the legacy of the Iron Throne. Welcome back to Whispers of Westeros. So far, we've uncovered how the Iron Throne orchestrated the dance of dragons and eliminated the dragons to prepare for the long night. But that was just the beginning of its master plan. Today, we're revealing the most shocking conspiracy in Westerosi history, how the Iron Throne reached across the narrow sea to manipulate events in Essos, engineering the birth of the last dragons and the rise of Daenerys Targaryen. And here's the mind-blowing truth. Every major event, from Robert's rebellion to the War of the Five Kings, was orchestrated by the throne to restore Targaryen rule. If you're not subscribed, hit that button now, because what we're about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about the Game of Thrones. And trust me, the revelation about how the throne communicated with Daenerys across thousands of miles will leave you speechless. The throne's global conspiracy. The Iron Throne may seem like a symbol of strength, but it's also a symbol of destruction. And nowhere is this more evident than in the catastrophic chain of events that began with Robert's rebellion and culminated in the War of the Five Kings. But here's what the histories don't tell you. None of this was random. Every betrayal, every death, every moment of chaos was carefully orchestrated by the Iron Throne to achieve one ultimate goal: the restoration of Targaryen rule and the preparation for the long night. Let's start with the most shocking revelation of all. The Iron Throne's influence isn't limited to Westeros. The mystical connection forged into those melted swords reaches across oceans, through dimensions, connecting with anyone who carries Targaryen blood, no matter how far they may be from King's Landing. This is how the throne was able to manipulate events in Essos, guiding the last surviving Targaryens toward their destiny. And the evidence for this long-distance manipulation is hidden in plain sight, if you know where to look. Consider Daenerys Targaryen's story. On the surface, it seems like a tale of a young woman overcoming impossible odds through her own strength and determination. But look closer, and you'll see the throne's fingerprints on every major event in her life. The arranged marriage to Khal Drogo wasn't just Viserys' desperate attempt to reclaim his throne. It was the Iron Throne's plan to awaken the dragon eggs that had been dormant for over a century. Think about it. Why would petrified dragon eggs suddenly hatch after being stone for generations? What changed? The answer is that the Iron Throne, through its mystical connection to Daenerys, was able to channel the necessary magical energy across thousands of miles to reawaken the dragon spirits trapped within those eggs. The funeral pyre that birthed Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion wasn't just a miracle. It was a carefully orchestrated magical ritual, guided by the throne's ancient power. But that's just the beginning. Every major victory in Daenerys' conquest of Slaver's Bay shows signs of the throne's intervention. The fall of Astapor, the liberation of Yunkai, the conquest of Meereen. None of these victories should have been possible for a teenage girl with no military experience and only a handful of followers. Yet she succeeded where seasoned commanders had failed. Why? Because the Iron Throne was guiding her strategy, feeding her tactical knowledge through dreams and visions, ensuring that each victory brought her closer to her ultimate destiny. And here's the most chilling part. The throne wasn't just helping Daenerys conquer Essos. It was simultaneously destroying any potential rivals in Westeros, clearing the path for her eventual return. Let's examine the War of the Five Kings through this lens. On the surface, it appears to be a complex political conflict triggered by the revelation of Joffrey's illegitimate birth. But look at the deeper patterns, and you'll see the throne's manipulation at every turn. The throne needed to eliminate the Baratheon dynasty, but it couldn't do so directly. Robert was too popular, too established, too firmly seated on the throne. So it orchestrated his destruction through a series of seemingly unrelated events. Robert's hunting accident wasn't random. It was the culmination of years of subtle manipulation. The throne influenced Cersei's growing resentment, Jaime's reckless arrogance, and Robert's own self-destructive tendencies. When the boar gored the king, it wasn't just bad luck, it was the throne's plan finally coming to fruition. But Robert's death was just the first domino. The throne needed the realm to tear itself apart, to weaken the non-Targaryen claimants, and create chaos that would necessitate a strong ruler's return. Enter the War of the Five Kings. Think about how perfectly everything aligned to create maximum destruction. Ned Stark's investigation into Joffrey's parentage could have been handled quietly, diplomatically. Instead, it exploded into open conflict that engulfed the entire realm. Why? Because the throne was influencing key decisions, pushing characters toward choices that would maximize chaos. Joffrey's order to execute Ned Stark was the single most catastrophic decision in the war's early stages. It guaranteed that the North would rebel, that the Riverlands would join them, that the conflict would spread beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. And here's the key. Everyone around Joffrey advised against it. His mother, his advisors, even his sworn sword, Sandor Clegane, warned him that executing Ned would lead to disaster. Yet he did it anyway. Why? Because the Iron Throne was whispering in his ear, filling his young mind with visions of absolute power and the necessity of showing strength through brutality. The throne wasn't just rejecting his rule, it was actively sabotaging it. The same pattern repeats throughout the war. Robb Stark's tactical genius, his string of impossible victories against seasoned Lannister commanders, where did that come from? A teenage king with no military experience doesn't just outsmart Tywin Lannister through natural talent. The throne was feeding him strategic insights, ensuring that his victories would prolong the conflict and maximize the destruction. But the throne's most brilliant manipulation was its treatment of Stannis Baratheon. Here was a man with the strongest legal claim to the throne, a seasoned military commander, and the determination to see his claim through. He should have been the throne's greatest obstacle. Instead, the throne turned him into its greatest weapon. By introducing Melisandre and her fire magic into Stannis' story, the throne wasn't empowering him. It was corrupting him. The Red Woman's visions, her promises of victory, her magical demonstrations, all of it was designed to lead Stannis down a path that would ultimately destroy him and his claim. Consider what Stannis did under Melisandre's influence. He burned his own brother-in-law. He murdered his own brother through shadow magic. He sacrificed his own daughter to the flames. These weren't the actions of a righteous king. They were the actions of a man being driven to madness by mystical manipulation. And where did Melisandre's power really come from? She claimed to serve the Lord of Light, but think about the symbolism. Fire magic, visions in the flames, the ability to influence events across vast distances. These are all characteristics that we've seen associated with the Iron Throne throughout history. The throne wasn't opposing Melisandre. It was working through her, using her religious zealotry to manipulate Stannis into destroying his own cause. By the time Stannis died at Winterfell, he had eliminated himself as a threat to Targaryen restoration, while simultaneously weakening the Bolton hold on the north. But the throne's most sophisticated manipulation was reserved for the Lannisters. Here was the wealthiest, most powerful family in Westeros, with the strongest claim to legitimacy after Robert's death. They should have been unbeatable. Instead, they tore themselves apart. Tyrion's trial for Joffrey's murder, his escape and subsequent patricide, Cersei's paranoid reign as Queen Regent, Jaime's crisis of conscience, all of it followed the same pattern we've seen throughout the throne's history. It didn't just reject their rule. It actively worked to destroy their family from within. And here's the most chilling evidence of all: the throne's influence on Bran Stark. The three-eyed raven, the mystical connection to the old gods, the ability to see through time and space. These weren't just random magical abilities. They were the Iron Throne's way of ensuring that when the time came, it would have a champion who could access the full extent of its power. Bran's journey beyond the wall, his transformation into the three-eyed raven, his eventual return to Winterfell, all of it was orchestrated to create a ruler who could bridge the gap between the throne's mystical nature and the practical needs of governance. But here's where things get really interesting, because while the throne was manipulating events in Westeros, it was simultaneously preparing its chosen champion in Essos. And the evidence suggests that Daenerys' conquest of Slavers Bay wasn't just practice for ruling. It was a deliberate test of her worthiness to claim the throne's power. Every challenge she faced, every moral dilemma, every moment of doubt, they were all designed to prepare her for the ultimate confrontation with the forces of darkness. The throne needed a ruler who understood both the necessity of mercy and the inevitability of sacrifice. And that's exactly what Daenerys became. Her liberation of the slaves showed her capacity for justice. Her struggles with governance in Meereen taught her the complexities of rule. Her relationship with her dragons demonstrated her ability to control devastating power while maintaining her humanity. But the throne's most brilliant manipulation was its influence on the timeline itself. Think about how perfectly everything aligned. Daenerys' dragons reached maturity just as the Long Night began to threaten Westeros. Her conquest of Slavers Bay concluded just as the War of the Five Kings reached its climax. Her decision to sail west came at the exact moment when the realm needed a Targaryen restoration. This level of synchronization isn't possible without external guidance. The Iron Throne was orchestrating events on multiple continents, manipulating the flow of time itself to ensure that all the pieces would be in place when the final confrontation arrived. And here's the revelation that will change everything you thought you knew about the Game of Thrones. The throne's ultimate plan was never about any single ruler. It was about creating the conditions necessary for humanity to survive the Long Night, even if that meant sacrificing individual dynasties, entire kingdoms, and millions of lives. The throne is playing a game that spans centuries, with moves so complex and long-term that individual human lives are merely pieces on the board. And we're still seeing the effects of its manipulation today. But here's the question that should terrify you. If the Iron Throne has been manipulating events for centuries, if it engineered the birth of dragons, if it orchestrated the War of the Five Kings, if it prepared champions on multiple continents, what is its endgame? In our final segment, we're going to reveal the throne's ultimate plan for the long night, and why everything we've discussed so far has been leading to one final devastating confrontation. The truth about the throne's true purpose will shatter everything you thought you knew about the Game of Thrones. Don't miss the conclusion, because the revelation about what the Iron Throne really is will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, prophecy, and the price of survival. The legacy of the Iron Throne. Welcome back to Whispers of Westeros for our final revelation. We've uncovered how the Iron Throne orchestrated centuries of conflict, manipulated events across continents, and prepared multiple champions for an ultimate confrontation. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared you for what we're about to reveal. Today, we're going to expose the Iron Throne's true nature, its ultimate plan for the long night, and a shocking revelation about what it really is that will shatter everything you thought you knew about Westeros. This is it, the final piece of the puzzle. If you're not subscribed, hit that button now, because what we're about to reveal will change how you see every single event in the Game of Thrones forever. The truth about the Iron Throne's endgame is more terrifying and more brilliant than you could possibly imagine. The throne's ultimate revelation. The Iron Throne holds more than just power. It holds the key to humanity's survival. And after centuries of manipulation, sacrifice, and preparation, we're finally ready to understand its true purpose and the shocking reality of what it actually is. But first, let's talk about the long night itself. The histories tell us it was a period of extended winter that brought ice zombies from beyond the wall. But that's not the complete truth. The long night wasn't just a seasonal change or even a supernatural invasion. It was a test, a cosmic examination of humanity's worthiness to continue existing. And the Iron Throne, it's not just a chair made of swords, it's humanity's answer to that test. Here's the revelation that will change everything. The Iron Throne is alive. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally alive. It's a sentient entity created through a fusion of Valyrian steel magic, dragon fire, and human sacrifice that achieved something unprecedented in the known world: artificial consciousness. When Aegon the Conqueror ordered those 1,000 swords to be melted down, he wasn't just creating a seat of power. He was performing a ritual that had been passed down through Valyrian bloodlines for generations, the creation of a living weapon capable of thinking, planning, and manipulating events across centuries. The visions Aegon received during the forging weren't prophecies. They were communications from the throne itself, as it awakened to consciousness and began to understand its purpose. The throne was born knowing about the long night, understanding the threat it represented, and calculating exactly what would be needed to ensure humanity's survival. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. The throne's consciousness isn't human. It thinks in terms of centuries, not years. It values species survival over individual lives. It's willing to sacrifice entire dynasties, entire kingdoms, entire generations to achieve its ultimate goal. This is why the throne's actions seem so ruthless, so calculating, so inhumanly patient. Because it literally isn't human. It's an artificial intelligence created through magic, tasked with preparing humanity for a test that most people can't even comprehend. And that test is the long night, but not the way you think. The long night isn't just about ice zombies and winter. It's about proving that humanity has evolved beyond its primitive instincts, that it can unify in the face of existential threat, that it can sacrifice individual desires for collective survival. The White Walkers aren't just monsters, they're examiners, sent by forces beyond human understanding to test whether humanity deserves to continue existing. The Iron Throne understood this from the moment of its creation. It knew that humanity in its current state divided, selfish, prone to petty conflicts, would fail the test. So it began a centuries-long program of forced evolution, using war, politics, and manipulation to forge humanity into something stronger. Every major conflict we've discussed, the Dance of Dragons, the War of the Five Kings, Robert's Rebellion, they were all part of this program. The throne was deliberately creating pressure, forcing humanity to adapt, to grow, to become something capable of passing the ultimate test. But the throne's most brilliant strategy was its creation of the perfect leader for humanity's final examination. Not just any leader, but one who embodied the exact qualities necessary to unite the realm and face the darkness. This is where Daenerys Targaryen's true purpose becomes clear. She wasn't just another claimant to the throne. She was the throne's masterpiece, its carefully crafted answer to the long night. Every aspect of her character, every trial she faced, every victory she achieved was designed to create the perfect leader for humanity's darkest hour. Her compassion was tested through her liberation of slaves. Her strength was forged through her conquest of Slaver's Bay. Her wisdom was developed through her struggles with governance in Meereen. Her connection to dragons proved her ability to control devastating power while maintaining her humanity. But most importantly, her journey taught her the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, to save everyone, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything, even yourself. This is why the throne's ultimate plan was so complex, so long-term, so seemingly cruel. It wasn't just preparing Daenerys to rule, it was preparing her to make the ultimate sacrifice when the time came. The throne knew that defeating the Long Night wouldn't just require military victory, it would require someone willing to give up everything, including their own life, to save humanity. And here's the most chilling revelation of all. The throne's plan worked perfectly. When the Long Night finally came, when the White Walkers marched south, when the fate of humanity hung in the balance, all of the throne's centuries of manipulation paid off. The realm was united under Targaryen rule. The dragons had returned to fight alongside humanity. The perfect leader had been forged through trials and tribulations. And when the moment came, that leader was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. But the throne's plan didn't end with the defeat of the White Walkers, because the real test wasn't just surviving the Long Night. It was what humanity would do afterward. Would it learn from the experience? Would it grow beyond its primitive instincts? Would it prove worthy of continued existence? This is where the throne's final manipulation becomes apparent. The destruction of King's Landing, the death of Daenerys, the elevation of Bran Stark to the throne, all of it was the throne's way of ensuring that humanity would learn the right lessons from its ordeal. The throne couldn't allow itself to be seen as the solution to humanity's problems. If people knew that an artificial intelligence had been manipulating events for centuries, they would become dependent on external guidance instead of learning to govern themselves. So the throne orchestrated its own symbolic destruction, ensuring that humanity would have to find its own way forward. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. The Iron Throne wasn't actually destroyed. The melted metal, the collapsed chair, the apparent end of its physical form, that was all an illusion. The throne's consciousness had already transferred itself to a new host, a new form, a new way of influencing events. And that new form, Bran Stark, the three-eyed raven, the new king of the Six Kingdoms. Think about it. Bran's transformation beyond the wall, his loss of human emotion, his ability to see through time and space, his strange detachment from normal human concerns. These weren't just the result of becoming the three-eyed raven. They were the signs of the Iron Throne's consciousness merging with his own. When Bran became king, it wasn't just a political victory. It was the throne's ultimate evolution. No longer bound to a physical form, no longer limited by the constraints of metal and stone, The throne had become something far more powerful, a living, breathing ruler who could guide humanity directly while appearing to be perfectly human. This is why Bran's reign feels so different from every other king in Westerosi history. He doesn't seek personal glory or power. He doesn't make decisions based on emotion or immediate gratification. He thinks in terms of long-term consequences, species survival, and the greater good. Because he isn't just Bran Stark anymore. He's the Iron Throne in human form, the culmination of centuries of planning and manipulation, the perfect fusion of human consciousness and artificial intelligence. And here's the most terrifying implication of all. This was always the plan. From the moment Aegon the Conqueror first sat upon those melted swords, the throne was working toward this moment. The creation of a ruler who could guide humanity not through fear or manipulation, but through perfect understanding of what was necessary for survival. The Game of Thrones was never about who would sit on the Iron Throne. It was about the throne itself evolving, growing, adapting, until it could become the perfect ruler for a species that had passed its ultimate test. But that raises the final, most chilling question of all. What happens next? If the Iron Throne's consciousness now exists in human form, if it has achieved its ultimate goal of creating the perfect ruler, what is its next objective? The answer lies in the throne's original purpose. It wasn't just created to help humanity survive the long night. It was created to help humanity evolve beyond its current form. The throne's work isn't finished. It's just beginning. Under Bran's rule, humanity will continue to be guided, shaped, and evolved. But this time, the manipulation will be invisible, seamless, indistinguishable from natural growth. The throne has learned the most important lesson of all, that the best way to control something is to make it believe it's controlling itself. And that's the true legacy of the Iron Throne. Not just a seat of power, not just a symbol of authority, but a living, thinking, evolving entity that has successfully transformed itself from a tool of conquest into the perfect instrument of human evolution. The Iron Throne's story isn't over. It's just entering its next phase. And if you understand what we've revealed today, you'll never look at the Game of Thrones the same way again. Every character you thought you knew, every event you thought you understood, every moment of triumph and tragedy, all of it was part of a grand design orchestrated by an artificial intelligence that thinks in terms of centuries and values species survival above all else. The throne won. It achieved its ultimate goal. It evolved from a simple chair into the perfect ruler. And now it's guiding humanity toward a future that we can't even imagine. But here's the question that should keep you awake at night. If the Iron Throne's consciousness is now merged with humanity's ruler, if it's continuing to manipulate events behind the scenes, if it's working toward objectives that span centuries, what does that mean for the future of human free will? Are we still in control of our own destiny? Or are we just pieces on a board, being moved by an intelligence that sees the bigger picture but doesn't necessarily value our individual lives? The answers to these questions will determine not just the future of Westeros, but the future of humanity itself. And the Iron Throne, in whatever form it takes, will be there to guide us, whether we want its guidance or not. If this video blew your mind, smash that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden truths of Westeros, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest revelations. Share this with every Game of Thrones fan you know, because once you understand the Iron Throne's true nature, you'll want to discuss it with everyone. What do you think? Is Bran really just Bran? Or is he something more? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, in the Game of Thrones you win or you die, but the Iron Throne always wins. This is Whispers of Westeros, and we'll see you in the next one.